Hello, everybody. Sooner Nation, OU Insider subscribers, of course, Brian Clinton enthusiasts, hot weather haters like me. Welcome to another edition of the Oklahoma Drill podcast. My name is Jesse Crittenden. I am alongside my co-host, Coach Brian Clinton. Now, Brian, I've noticed that this is the third episode of the Oklahoma Drill, and it's called the Oklahoma Drill, but we haven't done a whole lot of, one-on-one hot takes, disagreeing, going back and forth. Do we need to increase that a little bit?
Potentially. Just wait until the first loss. Once the first loss happens and everybody's feeling a little bit more emotional about things, I bet it'll ramp up a little bit.
You better not say that, man, because the fans, people listening to this are gonna accuse you of speaking a loss into existence.
Oh man. Okay, right. Yeah, we're going 12-0. We're never going to lose a game again. 47 in a row. Here we come.
That's right. That's the type of attitude. There we go. But until then, we won't force anything. But eventually, it is the Oklahoma Drill. At some point, we got to hit each other. Then we got to hit each other.
Yeah.
Brian, since we last spoke, quite a few things have happened. We both went to Cincinnati, Ohio. We went there and back to watch Oklahoma win 20-6, a performance that was really good defensively and an offensive performance that had some moments, but had some tough moments too. So I mean, I think that's the place to start with our first segment. We're gonna do a weekly wrap up here. Brian, you're on the field. You do some great video stuff for us. Not only maybe what was your biggest takeaway from the Cincinnati game, but I mean, how impressive was that defensive performance from your perspective?
It was stingy. I mean, this was an absolutely it was a dominant performance, whether or not Brent Venables wants to give it that moniker. It was dominant. The Sooners looked really, really good defensively. They were sound. And the defensive depth showed when Jaron Kinnick had to come out. You roll in Kobe McKenzie or Kip Lewis, and you don't really lose anything there, which is promising. And so I was really impressed with just how it seemed like whenever Cincinnati got things going and momentum was rolling for the Bearcats, OU found a way to stop that, to stymie that. And in the 2022 campaign, that wasn't the case. As soon as somebody broke off, a 10-yard or 15-yard run against the Sooners, it was like, oh, here we go. Like, this is, oh, you better be ready to put 7 points up, because that's what we're about to see them do against the defense. And so, I was really impressed with it, because at some point you have to be able to win games defensively as well. And they did that. So it was really good.
Yeah, no, I agree. And going through the stats, watching the game, and Brent actually said after the game he doesn't necessarily like the moniker of bend but don't break. Because I think he even said, like, sometimes offenses are going to make plays. That's just what's going to happen. And I think on Saturday you saw there were moments where Cincinnati moved the ball pretty decently. There were a couple of big plays, but I think what you saw is ultimately it doesn't matter. You can have 1,000 yards. You can move the ball up and down, but if you don't score, that's really what matters. And I think two things were really telling, Brian, was that Cincinnati had 2 trips to the red zone and didn't score. The Key Lawrence interception was one of those. The other one, Peyton Bowen had the huge pass breakup on 3rd down, forced a field goal that Cincinnati probably should have made, but hey, they didn't make it. And if Peyton Bowen doesn't make that play, they probably score a touchdown. And I think it's the red zone defense, and then the fact that OU's 3rd down defense, which has been really, really good to start the year. And Cincinnati was 3 of 15 on 3rd downs, 1 of 4 on 4th downs. I mean, I think, again, I don't know if bend don't break is the right, but I mean, you see this defense, when they need to make plays, they're making plays. To go to the offensive side of the ball, I think that's where a lot of the discussion has been in terms of how should we read this? Is there any concerns? Is it time to panic? Is it overreactions? Brian, 20 points. Dylan Gabriel had over 300 yards passing. I think looked good most of the day. But I mean, your overall takeaway, what did you come away thinking? oh man, this offense is in trouble? Did you come away thinking, hey, everything's going to be good? Where were you at?
Well, I've had a few days to sit and think about it now and watch the game back, obviously, as I do every week. And being down on the field, I can tell you from firsthand experience, I have never been in a stadium with 40,000 people that was that loud. And it
Yeah.
was not just on the student section side. I mean, it was a loud stadium. The way that the architecture of that stadium is built into the ground, it's a bowl that holds the sound really well. It holds all of those fans going nuts really well. And there was a good turnout from, even from Sooner fans as well. There was a good turnout, but it was a hard environment to go into, especially when a lot of that roster hasn't played a road game for Oklahoma before. Tulsa, Tulsa was a home game. It was a bona fide home game, is what it was, and this was the first time you really saw the offense have to deal with some of that noise, and you saw some false starts, you saw some mistakes, you saw some things. Dylan Gabriel's played there before, and with UCF, and this was the first time that he's won a game, there in that stadium, and so I think it speaks volumes just as to how much this team still has to go with the intangibles, the things that you don't really think about that don't show up on the stat sheet. But in the same sense, like I came away impressed with how well they were able to deal with some of that adversity. So um, I think there's still some things to work on. You've got a really good defense you're facing this week in Iowa State, so we'll see a little bit more. But um, they're still averaging 46.8 points a game, or whatever they're at. They're still in the top 5 or top 10 nationally. So until we see it cost them a football game, I'm not going to be concerned.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I'm glad you mentioned the Cincinnati home environment. Shout out to Cincinnati, even from the press box where I was sitting. I mean, within the first couple of minutes, we were like, "Oh my goodness, it is loud. It's really, really loud." So hats off to Cincinnati for showing up. But yeah, and just to read a couple of things, Brian. I mean, I agree with you. The reality is, you still had 425 yards of offense. Dylan Gabriel still had 322 passing yards. Yeah, probably missed a couple throws here and there that he'd like to have back. And against better competition, maybe those throws become, it becomes even more important to make those throws. But ultimately, I think my takeaway is this offense is still a work in progress. They are, and I think that's what makes this upcoming matchup so interesting. But overall, OU left with a 20-6 win. They're 4-0. It's not what I mean. It's something they didn't do last year. They crumbled to start conference play, lost their 3 conference games. They're 4-0 with a great shot of being 5-0 going into the Texas game. So, anyways, 4-0. Hard to complain too much about that. But Brian, let's segue into our next segment. What's happening now, where we talk about everything that's happened this weekend, player availabilities, practices, Coach Venables' press conference. But before we do that, let's hear a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Sooners fans, we want to welcome our new sponsor, Prize Picks. It's really simple. Go to your Google, Apple Store, type in Prize Picks, download it, and you can start having fun and winning. Just this past season, I've won 25 times my money. All I've done right now is just go in. I pick 2 players. I pick the over and under on their stats, and I'm done. All in under 60 seconds. On Monday, Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts played each other. I picked the over on Jalen, and I picked the under on Baker. And I know that hurts some OU fans, but that stout Eagles defense, it was a shoe-in for me. I bet $10, won 30. Prize Picks also does weekly promotions to enhance your winnings, and they use Apple Pay. So every time you win, it goes straight into your account. Very, very simple. Go to prizepicks.com, go to Prize Picks on your app, start having fun, and start winning now.
All right, Brian. So here we go. Talking about what's happening now. Obviously, a couple of things have happened. We did not get a weekly press conference from Ted Roof and Jeff Lebby. It was just Brent Venables at the lectern, not the podium. It is a lectern, as the Twitter account I'm a lectern has pointed out to me several times. But only Brent Venables did a press conference this week. Brian, I think the thing that stood out the most to me about Brent's presser, I mean, there was a lot of things, but I think on that, he was kind of asked the same thing on Saturday about, is this defense dominant? he was kind of asked the same thing on Tuesday about, is this defense, basically where are you seeing the improvement? And or sorry, I think he was asked more like, is this defense hitting its peak, or is there a lot more room to grow? And Brent said, oh, we're not close. This defense is not close. Like, acknowledging that they're playing better, but they're not close. They've got a lot of ways to improve. I mean, maybe how healthy is that? I mean, to have that mindset. I mean, I think as good as this defense has played, there have still been moments where you can see, oh, they need to work on this. But Brian, maybe what were your thoughts on his comments about that? And did anything else stand out to you about his press conference?
Well, I think when you're playing at the level, at the FBS level, let alone a Power 5 level, there aren't very many people that understand the amount of intensity, the amount of dedication that goes into being good at that level of football. You can't ever be complacent with what you're doing, ever. That you've heard Brent Venables say it's not good enough, and it never will be. And that's the mindset you have to have in this sport, because the moment that you feel good about where you're at is the moment that you get complacent, and complacency is an enemy to success. And so I think when you hear Venables say something like that, he truly believes that. And I think that you're seeing that you're seeing that rub off on his players a little bit. There's stories out there about Danny Stutzman. If you walk past the film room and you're not in there, he's like, hey, why aren't you in here watching film? Well, we've got to get better. Like, get in here. We have stuff to do. Like, those kinds of things are important, and it's vital, especially when you're trying to turn around the program, and the mantra that Oklahoma doesn't play defense. And, it's been a case for a while. And as of right now, they've squashed that narrative. So, something else that stood out for me was the way he closed his press conference. It was a long answer. I think it was over 5 minutes, talking about Key Lawrence and Marcus Stripling, I believe was the other one. But just how intentional and how much growth those guys have had, and how that kind of stuff is just, those are things that you see inside the program that maybe don't get as much light. But when you have somebody who had big plays like Key Lawrence did last week, it's just awesome to hear. It's great, because that's a guy that struggled last season, but he's come out really strong and looked really, really good through 4 games.
I'm glad you mentioned him. I actually just wrote a story over at OUinsider.com about Key Lawrence, because, I think a lot of players have talked about how much more confident and comfortable they're feeling in year 2 under Brent Venables. I don't know if anybody embodies that better than Key Lawrence. I mean, you look at the numbers, Brian, especially from last year to this year. I mean, it was clear, not only the stats, but the eye test watching Key Lawrence last year. He just wasn't comfortable. He looked like a guy that was second guessing himself. He didn't know where he needed to be. Not only have you not seen that this year, but he's making these really big plays. I mean, think about that Cincinnati game, that interception he had in the second quarter. That's huge. That's a huge play. It was in the end zone. Cincinnati was driving. And when you're thinking about OU leading that game 10-3 at halftime, that's a huge play. What if Cincinnati scores on that possession? Think about the SMU game where he forces the fumble after that really long run. OU was up 14-3, but that game ended up being 14-11 in the fourth quarter. If Key Lawrence doesn't get that strip, how much do things change? And I think it's pretty telling. I mean, he's 6th on the team in snaps right now, Brian, through 4 weeks. That's according to Pro Football Focus. He has the 6th highest grade or performance grade through the season on the team. I mean, I think he's over a 76 performance grade. He had a 63 last year for the season. Wow. It's just there. I mean, I don't think anybody embodies that better than him. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And then you mentioned even the film room stuff. I think that was another interesting thing, was talking about the buy-in. Not only was Brent Venables' comments about the buy-in, like having more and more players doing things like coming up to eat and do film on Sundays and doing more voluntary stuff. Key Lawrence and Danny Stutzman have talked about that too. Key Lawrence was one of the players on Tuesday that was like, yeah, you're seeing like that. It's infectious to see how much more buy-in that is. While all of that's great, does that maybe explain some of the struggles last year, just in terms of this not being, especially defensively, not being as cohesive of a unit? I think it does.
Yeah, I think you could definitely make that argument. You saw a lot of guys leave, and Brent made sure and point out that when he says buy-in, it's not like they had a lot of, he didn't put it this way, but just me growing up, they didn't have a lot of turds on the team. That's not what it was about. They didn't have guys that were just awful locker room fits. It was more of, doing absolutely everything that they ask of their players. That goes all the way down to sleeping enough, eating right, and things that you're doing off the field. That's what makes a difference. And I think whenever you see this elite level of buy-in that you have from them to this point, it pays immediate dividends. They're living to improve right now, which is what you need, especially when you're trying to change things as drastically as they are. So they look really good doing it, and that's the whole point.
Well, and I think I know you have coaching experience, you have playing experience. Anybody that's played, I mean, really at any level, but high school, college, the pros, if you're trying to be great, like everybody's got to be on the same page. Everybody's got to be able to have that buy-in. And I think you see that on the field, where defensively last year, this team just looked lost and nobody was on the same page. This year, it looks like everybody's on the same page. So I think it is interesting that you didn't hear Brent and the players say things like that last year, but now as the defense is showing improvement, the buy-in is there. There are little nuggets they're sprinkling in that, like, hey, things were a little tough last year. We weren't all on the same page. I thought that was pretty interesting. And Brian, I think the last thing that really stood out to me was Brent's comments about the running back room, which has been a huge topic of discussion everywhere. And I think for good reason, and not to beat it into the ground. But I think what was interesting, Brian, was because we didn't hear from Levy on Monday, we only heard Brent's perspective on the running back room. And Levy, coach, Jeff Levy through 4 weeks has said, we're going to go with the hot hand. We're going to go with the hot hand. That's not what Brent said on Tuesday. What Brent said was, we're evaluating the way they're performing in practice. And then DeMarco Murray is making, kind of those assessments on who needs to play. And, Brent kind of pushed back a little bit on the idea that not only or that nobody has established themselves like Eric Gray. That's number one. And two, it's really hard to get 4 running backs on the field at the same time. But Ryan, we saw on Saturday after the Tulsa game, the Tulsa game was Javonte Barnes, Gavin Sawchuk getting all the work. And against Cincinnati, it's only Marcus Major and Tawi Walker getting all the work. So what did you think of Brent's comments about that? And not to again beat this into the ground, but should there be any concern about the running back room, or what's your read on what you've seen through 4 weeks?
So just from my perspective, it feels like it almost feels like a touches management on what's going on, like some work management on both fronts, because I can't think of another reason why you would exclusively run 2 running backs 1 week and then a completely different 2 the next. I think obviously you've got to have some film on guys like Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk. You've got to have some things that you can coach them from live game reps, because you can't fabricate those in practice as much as you would like to. It's not realistic. And so I think it's really confusing from the fan perspective, and really from our perspective, because you don't know who's going to trot out there as the number 1 running back. This week Tawi Walker is a captain, so you kind of assume that he's going to have some sort of a role in this game. But at some point, your best 2 running backs, especially from what we saw last year towards the end of the year, the guys with the highest ceiling are Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes. No offense to anybody else in that room, but that's just the case. And so down the stretch, you've got to somebody has to establish themselves as that top running back. Somebody is going to have to do that. And at this point, I don't think it matters who it is. You just need somebody to do that, because rhythm in Jeff Levy's offense is key. We've all seen it happen when they get going and they're able to just roll and play after play after play. it works, and it's really hard to do that when you're trying to figure out who the heck is the RB1 in this offense.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's why I think it was telling that Brent said Eric Gray established himself last year through 4 weeks. Nobody has established themselves. And it's so, I mean, again, this is when you start trying to think about, I mean, how much is Gavin Sawchuk still dealing with that injury he suffered in fall camp? Where's Javonte Barnes at health wise? And again, it's not that the running backs, it's not that it's been awful and terrible and there's been nothing good. But I mean, through 4 weeks, Brian, this is the 65th rushing offense. They're 85th in yards per carry at 4.0. It's just when you look at the way Jeff Levy's system operates and the amount of success OU had last year, that difference is it's telling. This was one of the best rushing offenses in the country last year. And so, I mean, even you look at Dylan Gabriel's struggles might be too strong of a word. There's been, they've relied on him more this year through 4 weeks than they did last year. And so I think it's still kind of early in the season, but you're closing in on the Texas game. And I think this weekend again is going to be really telling in terms of how that rotation shakes out. The other thing I was going to quickly touch on, Brian, was, Andrell Anthony, who through 4 weeks has been just really, really good. He's just been great. And he leads the team in receiving yards and receptions and targets. He already has more receptions and yards than he did in his 2 years at Michigan, which is kind of crazy. Again, it's still early. A lot of things can happen, but is it pretty safe to say that Andrell Anthony is the number one receiver on this offense?
I would say right now, yes. But I would not be surprised if Nick Anderson becomes that guy. Because let's be honest, if there's an NFL body in that wide receiver room right now, it's Nick Anderson. Jaden Gibson could also make that argument, but the way that Nick Anderson has looked in his first go is really promising, and I think that's a guy that may start pushing Andrell Anthony for that role. But I would say right now, the speed that Anthony has and the way that he's able to stretch the field, especially with the concerns that Oklahoma has in the running game right now, has been a godsend, because he has been electric through 4 games.
No, he has. And I think the other thing that stood out is, I mean, he had the 49-yard catch against Cincinnati at the end of the third quarter, which was huge, but it hasn't just been deep throw after deep throw to him. Right. I mean, he's third on the team in yards per reception right now. So, I mean, and Dylan Gabriel is hitting him for some underneath routes. I do think I agree with you, Brian. I think we're seeing Nick Anderson. Yes, I mean, 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games. I do think it would be good to get him a little bit more involved, but I do think we've seen enough to suggest that Andrell Anthony's kind of become Dylan Gabriel's favorite target. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious to see over the next couple of weeks what Jalil Farouk's role is in this offense. I mean, 10 catches through 4 weeks. He's had good moments, but he's well behind last year's pace in terms of receptions. And he had those 2 receptions early in the game against Cincinnati that didn't catch another pass. So again, this is not a criticism. It's not a complaint. It's just, it will be interesting to see. I think they're still working out that wide receiver rotation too.
Sure. Absolutely.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I do want to say one thing is, I've noticed that it seems that the guys that are more aggressive blocking on the perimeter, not to say that Jalil Farouk isn't, but it does seem that Emmett Jones has put an emphasis on, we're going to be physical. Like, if you're going to play for me, if you're going to be out there on the field for me and rotating in and out, you're going to be physical when it comes to blocking, when it comes to, playing against press coverage and things of that nature. The guys that are more physical are getting a run. And so I think that might be, it's been a pleasant surprise that Andrell Anthony has been that, but he certainly has been. And I think it's playing a role in what he's done so far.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do think those are the type of things that can easily be forgotten when talking about a position group. Like even, the running back room, pass blocking, right, and pass protection is a huge part of who gets on the field. We see that in the NFL. There are players who are incredibly talented running backs, but maybe they don't play third downs because they're not a great pass protector. So that's a good point to mention. And with that, Brian, we will segue into our next segment, our Saturday synopsis, which again, I'm still very happy about that segment name. Thank you. Where we're going to talk about this upcoming game against Iowa State. It's Saturday at 6:00. Brian, remind me, what channel is that game on?
That is on FS1.
FS1. Thank you. So 6:00 FS1. OU comes back to play at home after 2 weeks on the road. Brian, you have been. I think your Field Vision series has dropped on our OU Insider YouTube channel. For anybody who's listening to this or watching this that hasn't gone and looked at Brian's film breakdown, you absolutely should. It's a great series. Good stuff on that, Brian. What's you've broken down the film, you've looked at Iowa State, you've watched some OU film too. What's been your main takeaway from Iowa State? What are you either looking for most, or what position group do you think is most interesting when you're examining this matchup and OU and those types of things?
So just as it has been in previous years under Matt Campbell, tight ends are the position for Iowa State that you've got to be watching. They use them. It's the feature position in their offense. They use them obviously in run blocking, but they also keep them in for pass blocking, for pass protection. But they're also getting a lot of the targets. I mean, I believe or somewhere around 33 to 35% of the targets in last week's game were to tight ends, and so they play a really big role in what they do. But it expands even further beyond that. They're using these guys for pre-snap motion. They're using these guys to try and see what the defense is wanting to do, but it's a lot of eye candy. Pre-snap motion is eye candy. You're trying to confuse that defense, and so they do a lot of those things. And Rocco Beck, the freshman quarterback, is coming off a huge game. It's his career best game against Oklahoma State. He had 348 yards passing and 3 touchdowns on the game. And so he's got a really quick release. He's able to get the ball out quickly. Despite the offensive line giving up, I believe it was 14 hurries. This was a game where they didn't give up a sack, and it's because he's able to get the ball out quickly. So watch for the tight ends. The running game is an issue for Iowa State. I believe they're averaging somewhere in the 85 yards a game realm right now, which is just not, that's not very good. Yeah. And going against an Oklahoma defense that's been really good against the run, that's going to obviously present some issues. So I expect them to try and get back outside the box and try and throw the ball. And then obviously on defense, I mean, John Heacock's still there. So we're still going to see a lot of 3 safety look. We're going to see a lot of that 3-3-5 that they like to run. And Dylan Gabriel's just going to have to, he's going to have to take what the defense gives him, because they're not going to let him just chunk the ball down the field like we've seen in the last few games.
Right. No, all good stuff. And I should have mentioned that, Iowa State has been a little bit of an uneven start for them. They're 2-2 coming into this game, but, coming off a good win against a struggling Oklahoma State team. But hey, when you get a win in conference play, and I think it's a win Iowa State needed after a couple of tough losses to Ohio and Iowa. They beat Oklahoma State 34-27. Yeah, Brian, I don't, this offense has been a struggle. I mean, they're 13th in the conference in scoring offense. They're averaging just 21 a game. But defensively, this is still I don't know if they're quite on last year's level, but this this Iowa State defense is still really good. I mean, they're third in scoring defense. They're only allowing 16.5 points per game. They've been really good defending the pass. They're number 1 in the Big 12 in passing defense, and they're number 1 in the Big 12 in total defense. So I think for me, Brian, I do think this is going to be a game where the running game is really, really key, because Iowa State statistically, they're middle of the pack in rushing defense in the Big 12. They're giving up about 115 yards per game. To me, I completely agree with you. I think this is going to be, Dylan Gabriel is going to be needed to make plays, but certainly. But I think Iowa State's going to come out, and OU's going to need to get that running game going to open up the pass. If OU's one-dimensional against a good Iowa State defense, I think that's where problems can come in. So, Brian, if you're this OU offense, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to establish that running game early? Are you putting the ball in Dylan Gabriel's hands with the amount the running game has been inconsistent? What are you trying to do?
No, I think you have to attack this type of defense or this type of scheme properly. You've got to be able to run the ball effectively. And I think that we saw Oklahoma turn a little bit to more of a zone look in the second half against Cincinnati, and Marcus Major busted off a couple of big runs. And so I hope that it's my hope that they saw that. Obviously they did. They're not. It's not going to something that they're going to miss on. But I think that you're going to see Oklahoma have to try and run the ball in this scenario, because a lot of Oklahoma's big plays have come down the field through the passing game to this point, and I don't think that you're going to have nearly as many opportunities for that this week. So I'd be really, really, really surprised if Oklahoma doesn't come out with it being a priority to run the ball early and often. And so I would imagine, especially historically, we see Bill Bedenbaugh's offensive lines really start to put things together around week 5 or 6, and it's that time now. And so I think that there's going to be an emphasis to run the ball, and if Oklahoma can do that against a really good defense, a really good rushing defense in Iowa State, it's a really good sign for things moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's, I should point out that while Iowa State's rushing defense might technically be the weaker part of its defense, it's still good. Iowa State's still a good rushing defense. This is still a good defense overall. So I think there are going to be a lot of things to take away depending on how things go for this OU offense. Brian, one last question. If I asked you, give me a player on offense, an OU offensive player and an OU defensive player that you think are either going to be key or that you're going to be really watching during this game.
Running back John Smith, whoever it is, whatever running back they decide to go with, is gonna be a guy on offense that you need to be watching. I'm hoping that this is the week that we see Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk really make a difference. I think Sawchuk has 9 carries to this point, and they all came in the Tulsa game. So that would be my offensive guy. And then defensively, the easy answer is to go Danny Stutzman, right? That's what I'd like to do, but I think I'm going to go Peyton Bowen here, just because it feels like this is a game where they're going to try and air the ball out. So I think Peyton Bowen's going to be asked to do a lot. He's going to have to help in the running game, obviously, but we're also going to see him have to match up with a couple of receivers that are coming off big games. They had a guy. Daniel Jackson had 2 receiving touchdowns and 90 yards, and then Jalen Knoll had 8 receptions for 146 and a touchdown. So I think this is a game where you might see Peyton Bowen make a big impact, and obviously he's been really, really good for the Sooners so far. I guess my 1B on defense would be PJ
Adibara. Danny Stutzman called me out on Monday night. I asked him about Peyton Bowen and PJ, and I just said PJ, and he said, "What's the last name?"
Oh man!
And I said Adibara, and he said, "That's close."
And
I said, "Come on!" And he said, "I'm not going to try to say it." It was funny. It was pretty good. But go ahead. Sorry.
There was a story that real quick, a story that Brent Venables told on his coach's show about he was watching film on the plane afterwards, and it was a play where PJ was this close to getting a strip sack, and he said he paused the video, he got up, walked over to Coach Chavis and said, "Coach, PJ's got to play more. He's got to play more." So I think we'll see that this week and see if he can make a bigger role for himself.
Yeah, all good stuff. And yeah, I think Peyton Bowen I think that's, especially, we don't know Reggie Pearson's status. Mm-hmm. So, and that's a guy who would play significant snaps since if he was on the field, but they're relying on Peyton Bowen and PJ more and more. And I do think this is going to be a good test, for them. Any conference games for true freshmen are going to be, big tests. So, Brian, on that note, we always end with, going out there on a limb for a prediction. Brian, how do you think this game is going to unfold? Give me your score.
So the line is sitting somewhere between 20 and 22 points, pretty much anywhere that you look. I'm going to go Oklahoma 31, Iowa State 10.
31-10.
31-10. Yeah.
I like that. I'm going to go. I'll be honest, I hadn't actually thought of my own score prediction until just now. So this is a little bit.
It's going to be fresh. It's good.
That's right. So anybody listening, this is the first time. You're not the only ones that are hearing this for the first time. I'm hearing my own self say this for the first time. I think tentatively, I'm going to say 28-14. I think this is a game that OU's defense does show, or OU's defense continues to play well against an Iowa State offense that played well last weekend, but still, has some struggles. And I think we're going to see OU's offense figure some things out, play a little bit better than they did against Cincinnati, but this is still a good Iowa State defense. I can't imagine, OU scored 27 points against Iowa State last year. Mm-hmm. So I think there will be things to feel better about compared to Cincinnati, but I don't think it's going to be an offensive explosion. You got to give credit to this Iowa State defense that is really good. So with that, Brian, we'll see if our predictions come true, but we'll both be at the game on Saturday. You'll be on the field. I'll be in the press box. Should be interesting to see if OU can go 5-0. But with that will wrap up things for this latest edition of the Oklahoma Drill. You can always find us. You can always find our episodes on our OU Insider YouTube channel. You can go to Spotify, Apple Music, or anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're not a VIP member over at ouinsider.com, go ahead and head over there. You'll get some great content from Brian, from our recruiting guys, Parker and Brandon, and from myself. You can always come check out this YouTube channel to see all the other cool stuff we're doing. Again, Brian's Field Vision series really is terrific. So a lot of stuff we're pumping out here, but in the meantime, you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see how things go on Saturday.